Hey everybody, welcome to our first Airbyte Connector Builder demo session. Really excited to have you all here with us. We just launched the Connector Builder into beta last week, and so we're really excited to share and talk to you today about how you could use that to build connectors for your custom sources. We have 45 minutes today. I think we're going to be a little bit tight on time, so I'm just going to jump right into things, and let's get into our intros. So for those who haven't met me before or haven't seen, my name is Ryan Bernstein. I am one of our solutions engineers here at Airbyte. We do demos like this roughly once a week to help show you the platform, talk about its functionality. But today's a little bit special since this is our first one for our connector builder. And so we also have Maxime and Alex with us today. These are the engineers who actually built this tool and deployed it for Airbyte. So you don't see them on camera just yet, but they're here in the chat. So as you guys have any questions, you have any feedback about the tool, please don't hesitate. Throw it in the chat. We want to make this as informative and helpful to you as we can. And so we have them there to really help answer anything you guys have about the builder. The other thing I want to say is this builder is designed to help bring any source that you have into Airbyte as a custom source. And so one thing that can be helpful to us is understanding what sources you want to build that we don't support today. So one of my asks of you is if you could just drop in the chat any of the custom API sources or REST sources that you're looking to support. We would love to see that. And that way the team, as we're building on more functionality and features, we can make sure we support your particular use case. So that said, let's get a quick background on what Airbyte is for those who aren't familiar. I think we have a lot of familiar faces and a lot of familiar names today, but for those who are new to Airbyte, Airbyte is a ELT tool. That means our goal is to help you move data. We want to get it from wherever you have it in your sources to your end destinations, commonly like a data warehouse, a Snowflake, or a data lake. But our specific specialty is focusing on what we call the long tail of connectors. We have over 300 sources and connectors in our platform today. However, we realize that there are thousands of possible sources, and there's no way that we could possibly manage and build all of those for you. So instead, what we focus on is making it easy and accessible to create the tools to allow you and our community to help build and add sources to the Airbyte platform. And that's really what the connector builder is about. And what we're going to focus on today is how you could take these sources, whether it's a internal API source you have, or maybe a very small bespoke API. We're looking at ones for like animal shelters, or today we're going to focus on SeatGeek, ones that you won't find in your traditional ELT tools, and bring those in and manage them with the rest of your data pipelines. So really excited to show that off. And again, as you guys have questions or feedback, love to see that here in the chat. So that said, let's get into our demo. I'm going to drop through some links here. And so today we're going to be working on SeatGeek. So I think that should work for those links. The reason I picked SeatGeek is, first off, it's a API that you can sign up for and get an API key for free without any problem. So feel free to use the link I put in there. It also goes to show a lot of the functionality that we have within the builder. So it's a great one if you're just trying to get your feet wet and understanding how the builder works. SeatGeek is a good place to start. So let's exit out of here. At the end of this too, we're also going to share a link to the YAML that we build. So everything you see and build today, you can load into your own workspace and run it as a test on your own. So for those who haven't been in Airbyte, this is what the Airbyte platform looks like. This is our demo account. Let me just make it a little bit bigger. And so you'll see all of the connections that me and my fellow team have set up before, but we're going to focus over here on the left. This builder is what is the connector builder is the new tool and new option that came out last week, and you should see it in all of your workspaces. And so one thing that's important to call out is this is not just for cloud or not just for open source. This goes across both platforms. So whether you're using open source or cloud, you should see this pane and allow you to easily and quickly build your custom connectors. When you log in for the first time, you might see a little bit of a different screen. This is showing some of the ones that I've already built before and their active versions. But let's go ahead and hit new connector. This might look a little bit more familiar to you. And I also encourage you, feel free to follow along. As I'm going through this, jump into your Airbyte workspace and click along with us. You can also get those SeatGeek API keys and actually just do everything I'm doing in sync. So we're going to build one from scratch, but you can also see that you can also clone an existing connector you've already built. That's load an existing connector, or you can import a YAML. We're going to share the YAML we built today, so you can import that into your workspace and use that as kind of a template to build other connectors you like. Before I do that, though, the one thing I do want to highlight is the tutorial. This team has put together an amazing set of docs and materials that will help talk you through how to build your connectors. We're here to help you and answer any of your questions, but in truth, we want you to be able to do this on your own without having to wait on us and make us the bottleneck. So feel free to jump into the tutorial, read through it. It will answer most everything you have as you're getting into trying to build out your specific connector. But let's jump back in here and let's get started. All right, so the first thing that we're going to want to do for this is we want to name the connector we're building. I talked about how we're going to do SeatGeek. So let's just go ahead and call that SeatGeek, and we'll just call that SeatGeek demo. You can call this whatever you want. This is how it will surface in the Airbyte platform for you to see. So as long as this name means something to you, that's really all that's particularly important. Once you have that, then the first thing we're actually going to need that's important is the base URL. For those who are familiar with APIs, most APIs use a common base URL, and then you have specific endpoints after that. You will find this often in the docs. So we'll close that. Let's pull up SeatGeek's docs. I'll link these in the chat. And so as we go through, you'll see here on the right-hand side, they have the first thing you'll see is the base URL, the API endpoint. That's pretty common for most APIs to surface that pretty early. And so let's just go ahead and grab that, and we're going to paste that in right here. Now we have to figure out how we want to authenticate. There's a whole host of authentication options available to APIs from not having any required whatsoever, but more commonly, you'll have one of these options. For SeatGeek specifically, we're going to use a basic auth. And I know that because if I come back into the docs over here, you'll see it talks through the various principles, but we have authentication. And under it, you see basic auth and how I have a client ID and client secret. So to jump back into the platform, when I selected basic auth here, it automatically creates two config items that we need to fill, username and password. And this little red bubble up here is telling me that that's where I need to put that data in. So you see password and username. Let's go ahead and I have that saved. So let's fill that out. Let's hit save. Great, that's it. Now we have auth sorted out. We need to actually set up a stream. And so over here, the plus button is flashing at me, trying to tell me that that's the next thing I need to do. So let's go ahead and click that. And it's going to ask me to name my stream. And for those who aren't familiar with Airbyte terminology, a stream is essentially an API endpoint. That's generally like one-to-one. Can also mean a table in the context of databases. But since we're focusing on APIs today, that's what it means here. So let's go ahead and name the stream events. And then we need the path for this particular endpoint. We can get that from the docs. If we come back up here, you see that there are 6 various endpoints that SeatGeek makes available. We're just going to do this one right here. So we can copy that. That slash is optional. You can have it or not have it, up to you. Let's go ahead and hit create. Once we've done that, we have the basics of what we need to actually really start rapid development. And this is where the connector builder starts to shine. On the right-hand side, we have our test pane. And so when I click this button, we're going to make a call to this API, and it's going to show us the response. And this is how we can quickly start dissecting our data and building this connector. And this is, even if you're using, say, the Python CDK, the power of this making it so easy and accessible is really incredible to help reduce your development time. So I like to work my way from top down. And so that's how we'll go throughout with this. There's also a lot of things to configure, and sometimes I might miss something and jump around. So bear with me as we work through to populate all the information in this particular connector. The first thing we need when we're setting up a stream is the record selector. This is going to point to where that data that we want is located. We want all of the columns we're interested in to be at the top level. So here currently you see we have events. Events is the top level item. So all we're going to say is events is going to be our record selector. Let's pop that in here. And now we can retest. Again, this is the power of this is as soon as you make little changes, I recommend testing often and frequently. So we did that. And now we don't see events anymore, but now we see all of the data we're actually interested in. What has happened is we are now knowing that the data we're interested in is nested underneath events. And if you jump into the response item, you can actually see that. So we have the body, which is the response from the API. We have the events item, and then underneath it is all of the data that we actually want. And we, along with the response, you can also see the request. This is the data we're sending to the API. And so if you want to understand how Airbyte's handling it, so like here's the user agent we're using, or how various fields are being passed, the request is really useful for that. And then the last one on this side over here is the detected schema. This is probably one of the most powerful tools that comes in the builder. Again, if you're using the Python CDK or other ways to build connectors at Airbyte, I'd still recommend using our schema detection. What it will do is, based on the data provided, it will infer a schema for you. And this can be one of the most painful parts about making a source, is you have to say, here's all the various columns, here's all the various data types you can expect. But this will do that for you. So let's go ahead and hit import schema. What that's going to say is, here's all of the fields I'm seeing. We'll see our declared schema. For example, if we come down to announce date for this particular event, you'll say, oh, that's going to be a string, or conditional is going to be a Boolean. And so it's super easy, and that handles all of that for you in just a click of a button, or alternatively, it was going out and typing out each one of those, referring back and forth from the docs on the various types. So that itself is a lifesaver. But let's get back into it. Records is generally where I like to work. This is going to show you the way Airbyte is viewing the data we want to pull and push into your end destination. So the first thing it's going to ask us for once we have this selector put in is the primary key. And that's commonly going to be something like ID over here. This is where Airbyte will, when we run normalization for you and we can dedupe, we're going to dedupe on this particular column. So it's up to you to select. You don't have to select it. If you don't, we just won't be able to run deduping. But if you do have a good primary key, we would generally recommend it, as that's how we can get you the best data into your platform for you. You do want to make sure it's unique, and we will do a quick check for you. If we see that something isn't, let's try a quick example here. I'm not sure if this will work. Put in type, say, great, this primary key is not unique. We found sports more than once, so that makes a bad primary key. So we try to help you out with that and make sure that you have a good one selected. And that's selected. Again, I'm going to run test again. Just make sure that everything is looking good. And it does. Awesome. All right. The next thing we want to configure here is pagination. So for those who are familiar with APIs, generally what happens is that you're going to get all of your responses split up into various pages. That can be handled a couple different ways. Commonly, it's going to be an offset, or it can actually just be using a page. You could also have a cursor pagination. We try to support as many variants of this as you see, and there's not that many type of flavors. In this case, we're going to use the page increment. And I know that because if I come back to the SeatGeek documentation and I scroll down, you'll see all of the data here, but we want to look at here. Here we go. So if we see per page and page, that's telling us how we need to send this information to SeatGeek's API. So first thing we're going to do is say, let's say page size, we can set that to 10. That looks like what it uses as the default. We can start from page. So if an API uses 0 or 1, you can set that. Let's just go ahead and we'll say start from page 1. Where do we pass page size information into the API? And so if we come back into SeatGeek, we see that's per page. That's effectively the limit on how many items you want per page. So let's just type that in here. Great. And then we need to tell SeatGeek what page number we're actually interested in. So let's go ahead and just say page. We got that again from the documentation. Now that we have that in, let's go ahead and run test, and we'll see how we are now going to start parsing that data. It's going to look a little bit different than we had before. Specifically, if you come down here, you now see we have the option to navigate through pages. So I'm going to click here, and you'll see the data is changing as I'm doing that. So we went from this is a music festival to now we have a sporting event. And this is us pulling the various pages. The other thing you can do, just to run a quick test, is let's make sure our limit is working. If I just say page size of 1 and I retest, what we'll see up here is the number of records being returned is 1. Before we were getting 10 records per page. And so same thing, we can put paginate through. Let's go ahead and set that back to 10, run test. You can also see how this is working back in that request pane. So if we come here, you'll see here we're setting page equal to 2 and per page equal to 10. So you can see everything that's happening behind the scenes as we're doing that. All right, I think we have it for pagination. One quick call out is if you're not sure how to set this up, or if you have it or not sure how to use it properly, you'll see this little icon up here. This is really powerful. So if you click that, that will pull you into that specific page in the tutorial, talk you through examples, help answer any questions you have, and really try to make this as self-guided as possible. So you can X out of that for now. All right. For this stream, we're also going to enable an incremental sync. So for those who are familiar with Airbyte, commonly a lot of our connections and sources use something we call incremental deduped plus history. The idea of that is that we can be more efficient in how we pull data by saving what we call a cursor. A cursor is a field, most commonly a timestamp, where we can say, great, we've pulled all the data up to, say, May 26th. And the next time we make a call to this API, only pull data that's greater than May 26th. This way, when we're making these calls, that we're not re-pulling all of the data and processing it every time. This makes it more efficient for Airbyte, makes it more efficient for your API calls, and overall is just a better way to design these pipelines. So in this case here, and we have some guidance on what a cursor field needs to be. You can hover over that hint on how to do that. Let's go ahead and select datetime UTC. The best cursor generally is an up, but it also depends on what the API makes available to you. Some of the important requirements for a cursor is that it's generally pretty granular. You don't want one that's like, say, at a year level or even a day level can start to cause issues. You want one that's preferably at the seconds level or microseconds. And you also need to make sure that the data we get back from the API is sorted in the right order. So if we hover over the cursor field, we'll tell you here that it needs to come back in ascending order. We're working on adding a little bit more flexibility there, but for now, when you're building any connectors and using incremental sync, make sure that those cursors are sorted in ascending order. And that's actually one of the things about SeatGeek that I like. So we'll jump back into their docs. And if we look, I think if we look for sort, let's see if we can find sort here. There we go. We have the ability to sort the way the records are returned. Some APIs offer this, not all of them do. But in this case here, if we jump in, we see this is exactly what we're looking for. We see sort equal to datetime _UTC.asc. So we need to pass that parameter to SeatGeek to know that it's going to actually return those orders in the right, return those records in the right order for us. So let's jump all the way down here, and we're going to add a custom query parameter. So this is going to be sort. We can just do that, and we'll chop that value in there. And so now when we make a request, we're going to pass this key value pair, and we can go ahead and save that in there. And then let's finish setting up the incremental sync, and then we'll run a quick test. You'll notice that once I clicked incremental sync, I have this little pop-up here. That's going to ask me for how I want to start the date time. So when we do incremental syncs, we generally try to time block it. Say we'll pull data from this date to this date. You can hard code that. So I can come in here and say, I always want to pull data from 2000 until today. Or you can also let the user pick it themselves. So we're going to do that with the user input, and that's why we're getting this little red arrow. So let's select that. We'll come in here. We'll use the date picker and say, let's use May 1st. Can hit save. Now, anytime I run this, it's going to try to only grab data from May 1st until the end date, in which case that is currently configured to be now. And then I skipped cursor granularity. Let's go ahead and set that up. That's going to be second. So if we look here at the datetime UTC, we see we have year, month, day, hour, minute, and then we have seconds. So cursor granularity is going to be set to seconds. I also need to update the datetime format. So we have a couple templates here out of the box, but I want this to match what I'm seeing over here. And it looks like that generally does. I just probably want to update that space to be a T. A quick tip I find helpful is that when I'm checking some of these things, I'll just pull up ChatGPT beside me and I'll throw that format into it. I'll throw an example cursor in there and say, hey, does this match? And it usually is pretty good at telling you like, oh, great, here's a problem you have, or here's an actual format you could use. Moving on, we now have the cursor field, we have the datetime format, we have the granularity. We said user can pick the start time, and we also have the end time. One of the things I want to call out, because I think there was a question about this in the inputs coming into this, was whether we can use something like a rolling window. And so that actually is possible. If we hover over end date time, it'll show you some examples that you can use here. So we're using now UTC, but you can also use other Jinja macros like day_delta and have a look back of -1. That will be, say, a rolling window of 1 day. You could also set that to 7 days if you want to make it a week, or you can make it a variable. You can make it user configurable, where when they set up this connection, they can say how long they want that look back to be. So we try to offer as much flexibility in building these as we can. The last thing on this is that we need to tell the API how to filter the data on the calls we get. Now, you can't always do this, but it is generally preferred. So what this means is we're going to send data into SeatGeek that says we only want records that are returned between this time period and this time period. You don't have to have this. It is generally really preferred. It makes your calls significantly more efficient. If you don't have it, what will happen is we effectively call the API and get all of the data, and then we're having to go through and check to say, hey, is this record new? Is it greater than the last cursor we pulled? And what you'll see in that is it'll take essentially the same amount of time to pull 10 records as it does like a million records, because we have to parse through all of that data. So if we can filter down those calls, we'll make this significantly more efficient. So to do that, we have to jump back into the docs. I think we have that in here. If I look for something like date, time, let's see, I think it's UTC, and we look at, there we go. All right. So we have the datetime argument in SeatGeek, which allows us to pass a parameter through that will filter the events based on a particular set of time queries. So there's more details over here on how you can do it using greater than or less than operators. But I think this example right here is exactly what we want. So let's just go ahead and copy that. So this one here says datetime UTC greater than a particular date. So we'll use that as our start date. And then if we come back in here, datetime UTC less than a particular date. Let's grab that. Awesome. So now what's going to happen is when we are sending data through to this API, we're going to add two different parameters. We're going to add the datetime UTC greater than and datetime UTC less than, and we'll start time blocking those queries. And so this will allow us to make those calls a lot more efficient. We already know what we've already pulled. We don't have to re-pull that data. And you'll see a lot of performance improvements by doing that. Let's test this out and see how it works. Awesome. All right. So what we should expect here is that I picked a start date of May 1st, and we see that, great, this is between that and end date of today. We can test this out, actually. If we go ahead and just change my start date, let's pick May 25th. Hit save. We should see different results here from what that was. Actually, this one is still greater than May 25th. We might be able to say, let's try May 26th and see. And this is one of, again, the real powers of this connector builder. It allows you just to quickly test and try the configurations you're setting up. And awesome. So we're now not seeing that event anymore. Now we're only seeing ones that happen after May 26th. Wonderful. Let's go ahead and set that back, though, to May 1st for the rest of this testing. We have successfully set up a incremental sync, which is very cool. And that will make this call significantly more efficient. And we're pretty much done with this particular stream. The one thing I want to call out is you'll see this little yellow warning up here and up here. What that means is that when we first ingested that schema, something changed. And now it is detecting a different schema. This commonly happens after you set up pagination because we're able to pull more records and get a better picture of all the data coming through with this API. So if we jump over here and we jump down, you'll see we highlight some of those changes. So in this case, we now have a new column, away team. We might have, let's see what else we have down here. We have a home team. We have something that was a null before and now we know has an integer. So we have all of this new information. And so we have a more complete version of the schema. We have two options on how we can handle it. We could say merge properties, or we'll take everything we had from before and all of the new information and just use both of them together. Or we can say this latest set is probably the most correct one. So let's use that. I'm going to do that in this case. I'm going to say overwrite our existing and use what we have. So, all right. I think we are about good on this stream and we're doing okay on time. Before I continue, I want to make one more stream. Is there any items we want to hit here? Take a quick look at the chat. Looks like Maxime and Alex, you guys have this. Awesome. And then Brian's in there too. Yep, perfect. Good call. All right, let's go ahead and set up one more stream. So I want to show how partitioning can work. So partitioning is something that's really powerful built into the connector builder. And oftentimes what you'll find is when you need to call a specific endpoint, you have to provide it a nuanced piece of information. Let's go into SeatGeek for a second. We can see here. So if you see here, we have these 6 endpoints available, but under the events, we also have one called event ID, where we can get specific details on that particular event. Oftentimes you'll see an API endpoints where you can call this stream here and get top level information. But if you want to get more detailed information, you have to provide an ID for it too. And so that's what we're going to do in this case with partitioning. So let's go ahead and set up a new stream. There's a couple ways you can do this. So you can just hit this button here, and that will create a new stream for you. Alternatively, you can also just copy out the stream we already made. Try to make this as easy as possible so you don't have to duplicate information you've already put in. In this case, I'm just going to build it from scratch, but if you wanted to copy the event stream, you could do that. All right, so let's name this one event details. And the path is going to be something like events. And then we want to put an ID here. So I'll just put ID as a placeholder. We're going to come back and fill that in a second. All right, so we have the placeholder URL. This is going to be a get. We're going to use a blank record selector here. It might be the same record selector. It could be a different one. So I'll have to find that out here in a second. But what we need to set up is partitioning. So we're going to jump all the way down here. And with partitioning, there's two flavors of it that we offer currently. One where you can have a hard-coded list. Say there was 20 different concert events I was interested in. I could actually come in and say, here's ID1, ID2, ID3, and list all of those out. That works well when you have a static list that you want to iterate through. But in this case, we actually need to pull that information from a different API endpoint. So we're going to use what we call substream. So I'm going to point it to the API endpoint that has the information I want, events. And in that, I need to say the parent key. So we know that's ID. If we jump back into the event stream, you'll see we have ID here. That's the ID I want to provide in event details. So we do that. And then we need to say, what are we going to call this in this particular stream? You could use the same string. I'm going to use something like event ID. All right, so now that we have that set up, we need to pass that information into the URL here. Let me come over here. I think I have it saved. If not, what I can do is we just copy this over here. And we're going to use something we call stream slicing. So I'm going to replace that with a stream slice. And then I put event ID underscore there. All right, so what should be happening now is when we call this particular endpoint, it's first going to call the events endpoint, get a list of those IDs, pass that in as parameters here into this variable. Let's find out if that happens and see if that works. And one thing you'll notice when you're doing these calls with these nested calls, they do take a little bit longer because we have to make multiple API calls in order to surface this. And this particularly gets true if you have multiple nests, which you can do. You can have this one be response that feeds into another endpoint. But over here, what you see is we have the event ID that we're calling and using. And we also have the slice of data that it came from in that parent stream. And we have the response we're looking for. One thing you'll note is we don't actually have a record selector here. The information we want is top level. If I use the same record selector we have in events, let's throw that in for a second, because maybe I copy that over. What we'll find out is that we actually won't get any data because it's looking for anything underneath events, in which case there isn't anything. So let's redo that, hit test. Awesome. All right. It looks like the primary key is the same. So let's go ahead and just say that. We do probably want to set up pagination in this. And so I could either go ahead and rebuild that, but since we've already done it, I can actually use this little box over here to copy the config that we created. So if I click that, it's going to say import settings from somewhere else. I'm going to say from events. And all of a sudden I brought everything I set up in the event stream right into event details. We run that test again. And what I should be expecting to see is multiple pages now for this. And looks like we have that coming through, which is awesome. Cool. Now we have the various partitions. Looking good. All right. I'm going to skip setting up incremental sync for this one. We'll keep this one as a full refresh, but I think everything else is configured here. The two things I'm not focusing on today, and we can maybe do this in another session, is error handling and transformations. You can add a lot more robustness to your connectors and say if I get a 429 error, that maybe I want to back off for a minute before I try making another call. Or if it's a 500 error, I just want to fail it and pass through the error message. So you can do some of that here. And transforms to also allow you to add or modify data. Maybe you have a sensitive piece of PII coming through one of your API sources, and you don't want to pass that through to your end destination. You can actually add a hashing function in where we'll hash that email or hash that social security number. That way it's not landing in your end destination. And I think that just about covers it. Before I go ahead and publish, I do want to show you that everything I've been doing here in the UI all it's actually doing is generating a YAML file. And so you can take this file, you can export it, you can actually come in here and add any custom or any YAML items that you want. So you can modify this and kind of jump between this and the UI as much as you want. It really depends on your familiarity and comfort with the YAML files. So that's done. I'm going to hit two things here. I'm going to export this. We're going to save this and share this with everybody after, so you can actually load this particular connector into your own workspace. But I'm also going to hit publish. So when I do that, it's going to ask me to name it. Let's call it SeatGeek Demo, and we'll call this just Demo over here. When I publish that, it's going to move this connector we built into the rest of the Airbyte platform, and I can use it just like any of the other Airbyte sources that we have. So let's go ahead and see that. So if I jump in here, it says, great, we have now published it, version 1. I'm going to hit new source. And if I come in here, you'll see all the normal Airbyte sources. So if you've been in the platform before, you'll know you have Amazon, Airtable, Amplitude, but we're looking for SeatGeek. And here we go. We have SeatGeek Demo. It does have the custom tag, knowing that you built this one, and it's not part of our main repo. But let's go ahead and click into it. It's going to ask me for the same configuration items we provided before. So let's just drop those in. Let's pick a start date. Let's do May 1st. And one of the benefits you have here is if you have multiple pull dates you want to do, maybe you have one that you want to only pull most recent data, and maybe you want to have another connection, you want to pull 2 years worth of history. That's kind of the power of setting this and making this configurable, is you can do this for each of your different connections that way. Let's go ahead and set up source. While that's running, it's just going to test out those creds. It's going to make sure that the schema we have is good. Great. All right, now we want to add a destination. I'm just going to short circuit this and pull an existing destination that I already have. If you guys want to see how to set up destinations and how to set up sources in more detail, feel free to join one of our other weekly demo sessions we have. And let's go ahead and just move through some of these items pretty quickly here. All right, so we have SeatGeek Demo. We can leave that. That's named perfectly fine. We're going to run this in the United States, or we could also run it in our EU data plane, but we'll run it in the US. We want this to run manually for now. We could also schedule it if we wanted, but let's put it into a custom namespace. I'll just make it a little bit easier for me to find and call it demo_workshop. Just apply it to a custom data set or namespace in BigQuery when I deliver it there. I could prefix the streams. I'm not going to do that here in this case. But what we see here now is these are the two streams that we made. So the streams that we built in that connector builder are here surfaced now in our replication tab, and we can configure them. So if we jump into events, actually, what you'll see is we have all of those fields that our auto-detect schema identified, as well as their various typings. It also automatically selected incremental dedupe plus history since we added that cursor and that primary key. And so that's great. And then we also have the event stream or the event detail stream. I'm going to just select this one for now. You could have selected both. I could also come in and pick particular columns I want to add. So that's something that's pretty cool about how we can configure these. So that's selected. Let's go ahead and hit setup connection. And what we're going to take a look here is this should be pushing the data to BigQuery for us. And we're going to take a look and see how that data actually looks. But before we do that, let's hit sync now. I'm going to take a quick pause. I think there's a lot of activity in the chat. Is there anything specifically that we want to get to while that data is running? Let's see. Yeah, to that last question there about flexibility, interoperability between the connector builder and the Python CDK. And I think Alex might respond a little bit to that, but there is a lot of overlap that you can use between the two. So I talked about before about the schema detection. That's one of the most powerful tools I'd recommend. You can also layer in custom Python into those YAML files that we created. So you can go into the connector builder, use that to get a base template. But then if you want to do something a little bit differently, you can just export that YAML file and layer on top a custom Python that you want and use the rest of the Python CDK. So let's pull this up. We can see that we are running here and we should be spinning up all the workers to deliver this data. If we come over here, let's come into the workshop. See if we can find that. Demo workshop, awesome. And we have our tables. So those who are familiar with how Airbyte delivers data, the first thing we do is deliver what we call the Airbyte_raw logs. This effectively is just like one JSON blob of the data itself. And so you see that here with Airbyte data. So this is great. That means our data is being passed through. We'll pass a couple other metadata items, but what we do then from this is normalize this data out. And let's see if we take a look at the SCD field. This is great. So we are currently writing all this data, and you can see that if we come back in here. Perfect. The sync succeeded. It was only 30 records. It took a little over a minute. And so you can get a little bit more information from the logs here. But what we're interested in is what we're seeing here. So let's actually just refresh this page real quick. Let's go ahead and type workshop. Yep, demo workshop. Great. So we have quite a few tables here. And so the main one we're actually interested in here is the events table. So let's pull that up and I'll explain what the other ones are in a second. But as we can see, we look at the schema. This is the schema that we pulled and identified. If we look at preview, we will actually see all of the data that we're pulling. So you see that music festival, Sonic Temple Festival is the same thing that we're pulling when we go back into that builder and we pull up SeatGeek. That's that same data, which is really cool. So now you can actually come in here. Now you can see that it's actually getting pushed to your end destination, which is great. So as for these other tables you see, let's jump back into this connection real quick. See if I can find it. Here we go. One of the things Airbyte does today is that we unnest nested tables. So if I look at an example here, we have the stats. This is a nested table that sits inside the event stream that has all of these subfields. And so we are actually going to turn that into events_stats as its own table. This is something that is probably going to change. It's something we're exploring right now, where you'd have one stream, create one table. But you might expect to see some of those tables get unnested how we work today. So let's check. Otherwise, I think everything else here looks good on this. Yeah, so I would recommend once you have a quick test delivery done, do just a data integrity check. Make sure that everything is getting typed as you'd expect, that everything is coming through how you'd expect to see it. And the benefit being, if it's not, you can quickly iterate. You can go back into the builder. You can change a data type in the schema. You can modify your primary key. You could fix any of the issues you have. And that's really the core of what makes this connector builder so special, is that ability to rapidly iterate, test and improve, and deploy these solutions in your own workspace. So, all right, I think that is most of what we had for today. And I actually finished a little bit early, which is great. Do we have any other questions in the chat that we want to pull up before we end up wrapping here? Take a quick look. All right, so some good feedback. I think this is great. So reading through a lot of what we have there, there are a lot of really good feedback about column selection, about parallelization. I think there's a lot that's on Airbyte's roadmap that we are working to bring to the platform. And so hearing that this is something that's important to you guys is really helpful to us. So, and as Alex called out too, one of the things you can do is just make sure you're always using the latest version of the Airbyte platform, particularly if you're running open source. On cloud, we generally manage that for you. Great. I think that about covers it. Other questions we have coming through. This is available both on Airbyte open source and Airbyte cloud, so you should see that. I was using cloud to demo today, but let me pull up. I can just show you open source real quick. Let's pull up my open source instance. So this is one that's running on my local, and you'll see that we have the builder here. I can pull into, I was making a connector for Harvester. You can see same thing that we were just walking through there for SeatGeek, we have here in Harvester. And so compatible both between the builder and what you see in cloud. Some good questions about how to use DBT and other things. We cover that in our other weekly demo sessions. We're happy to spend more time there, but we have various DBT integrations based on whether you're using cloud or open source, and you can use those to really have those powerful transforms. We say Airbyte is ELT, but in truth, we focus heavily on the EL with a little bit on the T, and we use DBT for our transforms. So I think Chris will be sharing out that recording. And so for those of us, or for those of you who like it, so Chris Rose will be sending out that link for you to download the recording. Any other questions before we wrap up here? Awesome. Yeah, and as Alex pointed out, we have a great Slack community and a Slack channel. So as you guys are building and you run into any issues, have any questions, feel free to post in that channel. Our team watches that, and we also have the community members who watch that and will help each other as we're trying to build through and support all of our various custom sources that we like. So please post anything you have there. And thank you all for attending. We're really excited about this and how this is going to help change the industry, and would love to see you guys use the tool, provide feedback, and continue to improve. So as we said at the beginning of this, we just launched this into beta last week. And so we're still a lot of room for growth, but would love to get your guys' feedback on how we can improve it and make it more useful for you. So thank you, everybody, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say.